That's enough out of you. A weekly podcast where you'll hear the truth, or at least a closer version of the truth than most of the bullshit that's out there. Here are your hosts, Bill Rader and Sean Kane.
Hello, and welcome to That's Enough Out of You. I'm your host, Bill Rader.
And I'm Sean Kane.
And this is a weekly podcast where we talk about all kinds of things. We talk about sports, we talk about history, we talk about sports history, we talk about historical figures, and we talk about pop culture, and what else, Sean?
We talk about the mob, we talk about mobsters like John Gotti, Jimmy Coonan, Whitey Bulger, historical figures like JFK, RFK, MLK, historical events. We talk about whatever we want, Billy, because it's our show, buddy.
Yeah, and it's going pretty good. We're for a couple of guys who have no idea what they're doing.
Getting a lot of great feedback, Bill. The questions and the comments and just the response we're getting, is just tremendous. And it's from all over, not just locally, but we talked previously, internationally. We're all over Sweden, France, Ireland. I mean, it's just been tremendous, buddy.
That's amazing. Yeah. Power of the internet, right?
Couple of gibellines from Archibald, buddy. We're doing all right.
So how you doing? You doing okay?
Good, buddy. Good. Things are going great. When we did that Red Sox Yankee rivalry one, Bill, I left out a couple stories I wanted to get in. So
okay,
we'll start with that today, buddy.
Yeah. Okay. But before we do that, John, I just want to mention that the episode we're going to do today, we're going to talk about Spiro Agnew, who was Nixon's VP. So this is going to kick off a kind of a mini series on Watergate. But I just wanted to mention that, Sean, before you went into your story. Sorry about that.
Okay, no, that's all right. Yeah, and this is going to be a fun series, Bill. Watergate is always an interesting topic to me. I've been following it for a long time, and it's going to be a great series. But getting to the Red Sox Yankee rivalry, the stories I left out. When we were talking about the old days, and listen, like a lot of our younger audience, they probably think we're crazy talking about this, but I remember the days when you didn't have every single game on television like today, and me and my dad and my brother and my cousin Mike, we're all like diehard Red Sox fans. So we would be listening to the game on the radio, the old school radios, Bill, and we'll be out on the back porch, and my dad will have us like holding the antenna a certain way, and it'll be coming in static, and it was crazy, thinking about those, and listen to the games, and just my dad, the story I forgot to tell, like my dad was such a diehard Sox fan because him and his brothers, they were all raised Red Sox fans, and the thing is, he never got to see Red Sox win a World Series. He died before 2004,
right?
And he just never seen him win a championship. And the thing is, when they won the title in 2004, me and my brother went down to his gravesite. We had a Red Sox hat there, a little mini hat, and we were going to put it on his grave. And by the time we got there, I believe it was my cousin Mike that beat us there, and he already had a little Red Sox hat he put on the grave. Yeah, so we put it there, and it was just just a great tribute, because it's a shame how many like diehard fans like that never got to see their team win a championship. And now, of course, me and my brother were a little spoiled seeing 4, but I don't feel bad about it, Billy. I want a couple more, buddy.
Well, that's a nice story, and there's nothing your dad would have liked more than for you guys to do that.
Well, I'll tell you, Bill, for a Yankee fan, my dad always liked you, buddy.
I know. I'm surprised. Probably one of the few Yankee fans that he liked, right?
No, he had a couple he let in his inner circle. He had a couple, but you were the one right from the first day he met you. He liked you, buddy.
Yeah. Yeah, good memories of your dad.
Kind of like your dad with me, buddy. Your dad was a diehard Yankee fan,
Yep.
Yeah, always like me, despite opposite sides on this one.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's a good story. Yeah, I don't think you ever told me that one before.
Yeah, it is a good story. And sometimes, we don't do a lot of sports. We got to do some more sports, buddy, because, we did get tied up in history and stuff. And sports is always, it's like escape from real life, buddy.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, well, speaking of history, so we're going to, like I said, we're going to talk about Spiro T. Agnew. They called him Ted in this episode. So let's get started with today's topic.
All right, buddy.
All right, so as far as Agnew goes, Spiro Agnew, I think, Sean, a lot of people today forget that name. Like probably if you went out on the street and asked 10 people who Spiro Agnew was, I would bet probably 5 or 6 of them would have no idea.
Oh, I agree, Bill. And Bill, it was like, because of the Watergate scandal broke, it kind of, was overshadowed, what he did. And because that was before, kind of outside of Watergate, it was separate from Watergate.
Yeah. And I think that's probably, the group of people who do say, oh yeah, I remember he was Nixon's vice president. They would probably think, they'd probably say, yeah, he had to resign because of Watergate, but
no,
that's not the case at all. I mean, he had his resignation, and that story actually had nothing to do with the Watergate scandal. Well, I mean, very little to do. I shouldn't say
very
absolutely.
little, but I mean, he reminds me of one of these old school mob bosses, Bill. I mean, that's the way he was running operations.
Oh yeah, I mean, we'll get into the story. I mean, he started off in local government in Maryland. He's from Maryland. Started off as a Baltimore County as a commissioner, and he actually became governor. He got elected governor of Maryland in 1967, and really quickly after that, Nixon selected him to be his running mate. So Nixon was running for president in 68, and he had a number of different candidates that he was looking at to be his running mate, including Ronald Reagan, and Reagan was one of them.
Right.
But he ended up picking Agnew. Agnew was sort of like a rising star in the Republican Party. He kind of reminded me of some of the, or at least one of the kind of Republicans of today. He was kind of a loudmouth. He was
charismatic. He really, he said what's on his mind. He really didn't care about, political correctness. He just said whatever he wanted to.
Yeah. And, and he used racial slurs and ethnic slurs from time to time. And I think he also, where, Nixon was sort of a moderate Republican, Agnew was really very conservative. So I think it kind of balanced out the, for the Republicans to vote for Nixon. He really wanted somebody who was more conservative to bring in those voters. And he got that with Agnew, for sure. And early on, when Agnew was first announced as the running mate, there was some controversy that there were some questions about some of his financial dealings in Maryland, which he got past. He kind of overcame those. And then there was also an ad, Sean. I don't know if you came across this in any of your research, but there was an ad run by the Democrats, which essentially said, it asked the question, who is Spiro Agnew?
And it was just laughing, right?
It was laughter. Yeah. So memo to
would have been McGovern, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Don't run an ad like that. That's not a good,
McGovern ended up winning only Massachusetts. That was it.
Well, that was 72. This was.
Oh, that's right. You're right.
Election. Yeah. So
you're right.
Actually, and so in 68, it was Humphrey.
It was Humphrey, right?
They beat Humphrey and Muskie, Edmund Muskie, who were the Democrats, and then they also faced an independent candidate as well. George Wallace was running as an independent. You know who?
Wallace Curtis LeMay. Yeah, bombs away LeMay. Bombs away. Yep, he was his running mate. Yeah. Yeah, but we'll talk a little bit more about Muskie, Bill, when we get into more on Nixon and stuff in Watergate and what Nixon's hatchet man Singretti did to Muskie.
Yeah, definitely. And then and we'll also talk more about the 72 election where they like you said, they killed George McGovern and won every state except Massachusetts.
And of course,
then,
Bill, one thing I don't mean to cut you off, but one thing on Wallace, of course, Wallace was the governor that Kennedy had a confrontation with over civil rights.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of civil rights too, Agnew always he would always publicly say that he supported the civil rights movement, but he really didn't do a whole lot to advance it. In fact, he criticized a lot of the civil rights leaders. He would call them agitators and lawbreakers. And so, I think that, again, that may be one of the things that maybe, maybe gained him some popularity in the conservative Republican base.
Well, I think, Bill, a lot of our younger listeners, I don't think they would realize like how really like moderate Nixon was. He really wasn't a conservative in the form of like Agnew was. Agnew was really
right
farther to the right than Nixon.
Yeah. And, again, I think that's why Nixon brought him in to sort of balance out the ticket and bring in those voters. And in fact, I think a lot of the, even the moderate Republican voters started to really like Agnew to the point where it was almost inevitable that Agnew would run for the presidency in 76 and probably win it. It became sort of just a matter of, that's what was going to happen.
Well, we're going to talk about it, Bill, but he came pretty close when he was vice president. Nixon was in a lot of trouble. I mean, it came pretty close,
Yeah, well, we'll get into that. But so, all right. So not long after they were reelected in 72, there was an investigation completely unrelated to Nixon or Watergate that began in Baltimore. But so, and I'll talk about that in just a second. When Nixon did resign, though, in 74, again, if this hadn't happened with Agnew, like you said, Sean, he would have been president.
Right.
So, I mean, the question is, well, how did he go from this rising star in the Republican Party who was destined to be president to, pretty much a disgraced and forgotten figure in the history books? And really, it started, believe it or not, by accident. So in early 72, a guy named George Bell, who was the U.S. attorney for the District of Maryland, he opened an investigation into some local corruption that was going on in Baltimore County. And these were local officials who were taking kickbacks and, bribes and extorting money from sort of like local contractors for government contracts. And he wasn't even thinking that it was going to go past Baltimore County, but he kept hearing rumors during his investigation that Agnew had been doing this. People were saying, well, Agnew did this, and I'm only doing it because Agnew did it. He got away with it. And he thought, well, all right, even if Agnew did this, it was 6 years ago, and the statute of limitations had expired, and there was no way he was going to be able to bring charges. So, he kept on his investigation, and eventually he was sending out subpoenas for documents, and he got documents from a guy named Lester Matz, who was a local businessman. He had an engineering firm, and he found in these documents from Matz that showed it really laid out this scheme that they had going, where he would pay Agnew, he would give Agnew 5% of the value of these contracts that he was getting, that he was getting these government contracts. He was literally, giving Agnew cash. He was going in and handing him envelopes full of cash that, were kickbacks. I mean, this was illegal activity. And
Bill, isn't that pretty much like what the mafia does? I mean, exactly, when they take over concrete and cement industry, and they're getting cash in an envelope and contracts and stuff. It's no different.
Right. I mean, this is a man who had the power to grant these contracts, these government contracts, which were very lucrative to these firms. And he was on the take. He was getting money from these men to do it. And not just while he was in local government, not just while he was governor of Maryland, but it actually continued even after he became vice president.
Right.
And so Bell found this, and he actually, this guy Matz was prepared to testify that he'd given Agnew upwards of like $10,000 in cash. And the more that Bell looked, the more he found. He actually found this guy Jerry Wolf, who was the head of Maryland's Road Commission. Wolf actually had verbatim documents of every single meeting he had with governor, with Agnew, every payment, every meeting they had. He actually had documented everything. So, Bell had all of this information, and he had two younger prosecutors that were working with him. So in July of 1972, he went to who was the newly appointed attorney general, a guy named Elliot Richardson. And Richardson had just replaced, I believe, what was it, you pronounce it Kleindienst, Richard Kleindienst, who was Nixon's.
Yeah, that's correct, Billy.
So Nixon had just fired Kleindienst. This was during Watergate. Watergate was going on, and Richardson had just been appointed attorney general. So Bell is going into his office to tell him, by the way, the vice president, I've got all of this stuff, and I'm prepared to charge the vice president of the United States. He expected Richardson basically just to throw him out of his office.
Yeah, exactly.
Say, I got enough going on here. But he didn't. Richardson actually heard all, he wanted to hear all the evidence, and he actually wanted to do whatever he could to assist in the investigation. And he gave, said, I'll give you whatever you guys need. So the investigation began, and eventually Agnew would find out about it, and he just went crazy. And see if this sounds familiar, Sean, but he called it a politically motivated witch hunt. He was blaming the liberal media. He blamed Muskie. He blamed the Justice Department for unfairly, attacking him, even though it was their justice. It was his, Nixon
right.
and Agnew's Justice Department. And then he said that he started this whole attack campaign that the Justice Department was leaking information to the press deliberately to attempt to taint any potential grand jury.
Well, I think, Bill, the important thing there is, this wasn't like the Democrats attacking him. Like
Right.
you said, it was Nixon's Justice Department.
It was unprecedented, really, at the time for an administration to publicly attack its own Justice Department, claiming that they were what he was saying was that they were failing in the Watergate investigation, and that they needed to do something to kind of recoup what they had lost in Watergate. And Agnew said, well, I'm a big fish, and that's why they're coming after me. I mean, at that point, even Nixon hadn't done that publicly. He was not attacking the Justice Department publicly, but Agnew was. And he said in a speech, he said, even if I am indicted, I will not resign. If indicted, I will not resign. He pounding his fist to that.
Yeah.
And he had a lot of support among his supporters. They were writing him letters. There's a lot of letters in the National Archive, and you can see some of these letters that people said. I think some of the quotes were, "I'm sick of what the liberal media and the Democrats are doing, and they lost and they can't take it." One guy said, "Dear Mr. Vice President, we believe in your innocence. Give them hell. The press and the liberals are out to get you and all the conservatives." But They were fighting back. I mean, Agnew was fighting back, but he wasn't attacking or disputing any of their findings in the investigation. He was just going after the investigators. He was attacking their credibility. He was attacking the media for reporting it. He was attacking the Democrats, even though they had nothing to do with it, really. And this was just a criminal investigation led by a Republican Justice Department into criminal acts committed by a Republican government official.
Well, Bill, I think the important thing here is to focus on the corruption is corruption. I mean, it's on both sides. It's Republican, it's Democrat. I mean, it's, it doesn't have to be just one party. I mean, and this was unbelievably corrupt. Like I said, this is like he's acting like a mob boss,
right?
And like you said, he's not disputing the charges. He's just making all these wild, comments and this and that. But I mean, these charges are unbelievable. I mean, it's like he's running the concrete club in New York.
That's right. He actually went as far, Sean, as to he attacked the media. So what he did was he said that the Justice Department was leaking facts to the media, and his legal team, so Agnew's legal defense team, was actually looking to put these reporters who were writing these stories under oath to try to coerce them to reveal their sources. And they actually got a judge to sign off on it. So they subpoenaed all these reporters. There were a bunch of reporters from different newspapers, different networks, and they called them the Agnew Nine. And then the funny story is there was a reporter who called Agnew's defense lawyer and said, "Hey, I didn't get a subpoena. I've been writing these articles too, and you didn't subpoena me."
Unbelievable.
So apparently they weren't too scared of it. So he ended up getting a subpoena. So the Agnew 9 became the Agnew 10.
Wow.
But they were closing in on him. I mean, the investigators had that. I talked about that guy, Jerry Wolf, who was the road commissioner in Maryland. And when Agnew found out they were going to question him, he was terrified. He really was. He knew that Wolf had all of this documentation, and at that point he went to H.R. Haldeman, who we'll talk about.
Yeah, we're going to talk a lot about Haldeman. Yeah. But this is where the obstruction of justice starts coming in, Bill, because he really starts trying to obstruct the case.
Yeah. So he went to Haldeman, who was the White House chief of staff. And he said he wanted Haldeman to put a stop to it. He wanted them to put a stop to questioning Wolf. And Haldeman, to his credit, said that he wouldn't do it, but he did refer it to Ehrlichman.
Right.
So
which they did a lot, Bill. They did a lot of that. When we talk about Watergate, we're going to talk about a lot of Nixon kind of to Haldeman to Ehrlichman. That's kind of how it went.
Yeah. Yeah. And what was going on was they were talking. So Ehrlichman and Haldeman and Agnew and Nixon were having these conversations in the Oval Office where they were being recorded.
Right.
There are tapes that have recorded some of these conversations. And one of the things that they decided they were going to try to do was they were going to approach a sitting U.S. senator whose name was Glenn Bell, who was actually the brother of George Bell,
right,
who was the prosecutor in the case. And Glenn Bell was, when he was running for the Senate, Nixon and Agnew did a lot of campaigning for him and really helped him get that Senate seat. So what they felt was, if we put pressure on this guy, on Glenn Bell, to talk to his brother and try to get him to stop the investigation, we can do that. We can say to him, "Hey, look, if you want to get reelected, you better talk to your brother about getting this thing shut down." And so what was going on was nobody wanted to be the one to directly talk to Glenn Bell about this because they
Right.
certainly didn't want to be implicated. So they would find emissaries. They would find people to send to talk to him. And one of the people that they identified to go and actually have a conversation with Bell
Yeah.
was the man who was the chair at the time, the chair of the Republican National Committee.
Yeah.
And you know who that was, Sean?
Yeah. George Bush.
George Bush, who
Yeah.
would later go on to become CIA director and then vice president and eventually became president of the United States. And he actually, there is documented proof that George Bush took place in this, he took part in this, this obstruction scheme to get them to shut this investigation down.
And of course, Bill, George Bush, even though, he would later be named CIA director by Ford, he had, ties to the CIA way before that. I mean, he was a contract agent, going back to the Bay of Pigs, and Operation Zapata was the code name for the Bay of Pigs, and Zapata Oil was Bush's oil company.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of documentation now that ties Bush to the CIA way before he actually became director, just as a side note there.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too, because even the prosecutors didn't know any of this until very recently when it was uncovered. And I'll tell you, I got most of this information that I got is from this podcast that Rachel Maddow did called Bagman. If you haven't heard it, it's really interesting. I think it's like a 6 or 7 part series. And it gives you a lot of insight into what was going on at that time and, just how corrupt this administration was. She really did amazing work. I know not everybody loves Rachel Maddow. I happen to. I really do like her. I think she's fantastic. But
well, the one issue I do have with Maddow though is after the release of the last couple of documents on the Kennedy assassination, she basically said, well, we know there's nothing there. And I'm like thinking, well, these are like thousands of documents that are just released within the last hour, and there's nothing there. Like, what do you have? Like, how can you read these documents? Like, it takes years to go through these documents, Bill. So that's one issue I have with her. But the podcast itself, she did a good job on this one. And this isn't like we don't go into politics on the show. That's not what we do. We don't go into picking sides here. Like I said, corruption is on both sides, and this just happens to be this part of history that's really interesting, and that's why we're discussing it.
Yeah, very interesting. So Bush would go to talk to Bell. A lot of different people went to talk to this guy, this Glenn Bell, and he actually had conversations with his brother, but nothing that would be deemed illegal or inappropriate, anything like that. I mean, he never tried to influence his brother to stop the investigation. But they were doing everything they could think of to try to stop it. I mean, it just goes to show you there was really no limit to what they would do to obstruct these investigations into them. And they were getting closer, and he knew it. I mean, Agnew knew they were getting to him, and what was going on was at that time, now we're getting into like 1973, mid 73, where Watergate was just at an all-time boiling rage. And they knew that it was only a matter of time before Nixon had to resign. So there was a ton of pressure on them to get Agnew out of office, because if Nixon resigned,
he was going to be president.
He would have become president.
Yeah, and it was close.
It was close. And how do you the question to this day exists, can you indict a sitting president?
Right.
No one has really been able to answer that question. And so,
well, even Bill, going back to Johnson, there was a lot of, he was tied up with the Baker scandal, and there was a lot of talk that he was going to be indicted, before JFK was assassinated and he had to take over. So, they didn't want to, then the investigation just kind of ended, because he's a sitting president. So we're not going to indict him. We're not going to go any further.
And that's why there was so much pressure to get him out of office. They just wanted him out of there, because had he become president, it would have been complicated. even if they did continue the investigation, I mean, you're really throwing the entire government of the United States is into total chaos. Not that it wasn't at that time, but I mean, imagine, the president resigning and then the vice president takes over and then he's indicted and he's got
separate issues too. I mean, separate
issues. Yeah.
And the thing is, Bill, towards the end there, Nixon, I don't know if we were going to get into this next, but Nixon turned on Agnew.
He did.
Towards the end. And of course, Agnew goes into later on, he would say that he feared for his life, that he thought Nixon was going to have him assassinated.
Yeah, that was so. Well, what led to that was these prosecutors had him dead to rights. I mean, they had him, no pun intended, but they had him on all of these crimes, including obstruction. They had him on these bribery and extortion crimes. And what actually made all of this happen was the IRS. I mean, the IRS they were following the money, so to speak, right? That was the whole theme of the Watergate scandal. But if you follow the money,
that's a famous quote by Deep Throat in the movie.
That's right. But what the IRS did was they found that Agnew had been making some very interesting purchases with his ill-gotten gains. And one of the things that he bought, he was buying some like really expensive gifts. And one of the gifts that he bought was a diamond bracelet. That was a lady's diamond bracelet. And it was not given to his wife.
Wow.
Big surprise there, huh?
Yeah.
So Agnew found out about this, and he absolutely did not want that to become public. So he agreed to make a deal. And all of that bravado and the scheming and the I will not resign if indicted and all of that stuff. And this is really what finally brought him down. So he agreed. They came to an agreement with the prosecutors. He agreed to plead guilty to one felony count of tax evasion. In exchange, he would agree to resign the vice presidency. And of
course, Bill, as a side note there, Agnew became really good friends with Frank Sinatra. And later on, he would borrow money from, I believe he borrowed like 200-300 grand.
Yeah, and Sinatra gave him money for his defense. Sinatra actually also, there was a lawyer. One of his on his defense team was Sinatra's lawyer,
right? And
they were the ones they kind of went back into after they made this deal. They went to the vice president's office, and they were trying to figure out, to announce this resignation. How do we do this? How do we want to word this and everything? And everyone came up with their own letter, and they were saying, because of this or because of that, I'm going to resign. And what ended up happening was, and I forget who it was that came up with it. I was one of Agnew's lawyers. Just said, here, just say I'm announcing that I'm resigning effective immediately as vice president of the United States. And that's exactly what it was. And that's what the letter to Nixon would be. And what was interesting is he was going to go into court to make this guilty plea or actually he was going to plead no contest. I think it was to one count of felony tax evasion. And the plan was, and this is what actually happened, as soon as he would walk into the courtroom, the resignation letter would be delivered to Nixon. So it was timed, it was timed. Right. Yeah, absolutely. The timing worked out to like the exact minute. So the second he walked into that courtroom, Nixon would get the resignation. It would be released to the press. And obviously all hell would break loose because nobody knew this was happening. It was a surprise. Nixon knew. He actually went to Nixon the day before and told him what was going to happen. But there weren't that many people that knew. And so they walked into court. And remember, I said that they were going to have these reporters. They were subpoenaing these reporters to talk about, to get them to reveal their sources. The reporters were there thinking that they were going to be put on the stand. And the judge said, no, you guys are not. We've got something else. You need to go to the back. And so, they showed up that day thinking they were going to be witnesses, and they ended up being reporters. They were reporting on this plea of no contest to tax evasion. It was pretty crazy.
Just amazing stuff, Bill, and like you said before, like Agnew's like a footnote now, just forgotten in history, but this is just incredible, kind of outside story of going on during Watergate.
Yeah. And so the day was October 10th, 1973. That was the day of that he publicly resigned. And again, he pled no contest. He was no longer vice president. It's just amazing. Now, the other part of this, Sean, is that he wasn't sentenced to jail time. A lot of people, there's a misconception. Even you said that to me. That, oh yeah, he went to jail.
Yeah, no, and he didn't. I thought he did, Bill. I really thought he did until I researched it more.
Yeah, no.
He never did nothing. I thought he did like a country club, playing tennis and stuff like that in one of them prisons. But no, he didn't do nothing. No time.
No jail time. And he wasn't even ordered to pay back any of the money. Although years later he would be sued, I think in civil court. The state of Maryland ended up suing him for back taxes or whatever it was on a lot of the monies that he made off with. But that was about it. And then, like you said, Sean, he kind of disappeared for a while. He disappeared from public life. He really wasn't. He didn't do a whole lot of interviews, and the ones he did, like you said, he kind of accused Nixon of threatening to
assassinate him. Yeah.
Yeah. Because he just wanted this guy out. Nixon just wanted to get rid of this guy eventually. There was enough pressure on Nixon at that point. He was going crazy as it was from Watergate, and this was one headache he just didn't need. So,
and Bill, there was so much paranoia inside this White House. I mean, it's just amazing when you read about all the stuff that was going on. Like, there's so many side stories, and Watergate is such a deep story. Like, people want to just talk about that last bit break-in, but that's like one little tiny piece of the entire puzzle.
Yeah, and this really wasn't even part of it.
No, this is like an outside story going on during the same time.
Yeah, just incredible. It's to think that you could have such little regard for the rule of law and get elected. I mean, I guess it's I guess it's pretty commonplace, right? I guess now we know that it's not all that different, that politics and crime are not no,
I mean, different. It's all over the place, Bill, and it's terrible, and the corruption is unbelievable. But again, Bill, I always go back to, the Genesis goes back to November 22nd, 63. When you blow a president's head off and at high noon in a major city for the world to see, and you get away with it. I mean, you're pretty much opening the door for, a system that's really failed the people and just total corruption everywhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an incredible story.
At least in this case, justice was served, so to speak. But and Agnew had again, he was one of these guys that was just he was sort of the heir apparent, right? He would be president.
And you have to give the prosecutors tremendous credit for pursuing this, like, I mean, the pressure on them had to be, unbelievable. And everything going on with Watergate, and you're thinking this guy's going to he's next in line to be president, and this separate investigation. And I mean, just the pressure on them to, really just let it go and do nothing. I mean, and they went forward with it,
Yeah, just amazing. All the corruption, and yet people still to this day look at Nixon as some of the things that he did, some of his policies were good. And we'll talk about that when we get into Nixon, but hard to ignore this stuff, really is.
Thing is, Bill, I've been studying Watergate for a long time. And the thing is, it really comes down to this, to sum it up. It's years and years of a corrupt, paranoid president, and years of black ops, and when those two things collided, what you ended up having is a blood feud between Richard Nixon and Richard Helms, who we talked about a lot on the show, who, was Dulles' guy, and he became CIA director. And that's the part of the story that's left out of the official story, because everybody knows the official story, and it's just like everything else in history. Like sometimes the official story is a complete lie, and in some cases like this, it's not a lie, but it's incomplete. And the entire angle of the CIA is left out of the official story of Watergate, and Helms' involvement, and all the members, the plumbers, they were all, CIA guys. And that story's kind of left out. That part is left out. So, there's so many different, there was a military spy ring going on. There was the prostitution angle going on, the stuff that was going on with Segretti and Muskie. I mean, there's so many different, and during this whole time, Bill, we could never escape the names of Dulles and Rockefeller, because even though Dulles was dead by then, his ghost is all over this, because Helms, was one of his guys. And then, the shadow of David Rockefeller is all over Watergate. And you can never, and of course, David's brother would end up becoming vice president when it's all done, Nelson.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you just can't escape the names of Dulles and Rockefeller, Bill, no matter what historical event you choose. They're just always in the shadows, buddy. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. We're going to get into Nixon. We're going to get into Watergate. And, we're probably going to end up opening more doors and more questions, because there's so much information in Watergate, and so much that we know, but it actually opens up more questions, So it's just a interesting time period in the history of this country.
Oh, for sure. You and I were too young at that point to really understand what was going on. We were just little, but again, I think that's probably why a lot of people our age probably have no idea. If you ask them who Spiro Agnew is, they wouldn't be. They might remember he was vice president at some point, but probably wouldn't know much about this, which is again why we want to talk about it. And that's what we do. We want to bring the info, the truth to the people.
We tried to, Billy, and this was a good episode, Bill, and great job. You did a lot of the research on this on Agnew, and I just want to say you did a great job, setting this episode, and I think it was really good, buddy.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It was interesting, because just on a personal note, I mean, I never, I never knew too much about Agnew when I was growing up. I knew about Nixon. I did a lot of research on Nixon and Watergate, and was actually going to write a paper on Richard Nixon in college. The assignment was to write a paper about a leader, and I was going to write about Nixon. And I told my dad, and he kind of discouraged me. He said, "No," he said, "don't pick him. Pick somebody else." And I said, "No," I said, I'd rather do this. And I remember I got a phone call from him one night, and he said, when is this due, this assignment? And I said, "Oh, it's due in a couple of days." He said, "Do me a favor, pick somebody else." He said, "What you're going to do is you're going to end up finding that you don't want to write this. You're going to get, neck deep into this research, and you're going to find you don't want to write it about Nixon. So pick somebody else."
Right.
And I did.
Who'd you end up picking, Bill?
You know who I picked? I actually ended up picking Vince McMahon.
Oh, really?
And speaking of guys who had to resign in shame, but but at that time that was like the mid 90s, I think, early 90s, mid 90s. And, he was a leader. I mean, he was a guy who took over a company and turned it into a worldwide,
he sure did.
Player. Yeah. So anyway, but yeah, just a lot of good stuff.
Whatever you think of Richard Nixon, though, Bill, he's a fascinating character, buddy. Whatever your opinion is, this is going to be, this was a great first episode, and we're going to get into some more here. This is going to be really good.
Yeah, I'm excited about it, and hope you guys are too. Make sure you stay tuned. Make sure you are following us for more information. And when our episodes come out, we come out every Friday on our podcasts, and you can actually get it the day early on YouTube if I remember to upload it. It's time to upload it is more like it. But yeah, you find us on YouTube, and all your podcast outlets. And we have Facebook, we have Instagram, we have Twitter, as long as Twitter is still around. And make sure you look us up. Make sure you give us a good review, and make sure you subscribe. Sean, how much does it cost to subscribe on YouTube?
Costs $0, Billy.
Oh,
It
zero.
costs you
So
nothing. It costs you nothing, but it helps us, buddy. So just all you got to do is hit that subscribe button, be logged into your email, and it helps out the podcast tremendously, but it doesn't cost you 1 cent.
doesn't cost a dime. No excuses. No reason not to subscribe on YouTube.
We're not
Give
like
us
Spiro
a-
Agnew, Bill. We're not, accepting
We're
cash
not asking for
envelopes and stuff.
kickbacks.
No.
No, we're not getting any envelopes. That's for sure. No. That, you know what, I was thinking about that today. That the one line from The Sopranos, when I forget somebody gave Richie Aprile an envelope, and he said, as a pimp says to his hose, keep them coming.
Keep them coming, yeah.
All right. Well, anyway, good job, Sean.
All right,
And,
buddy. Great job.
We'll see you guys next time. And that's enough out of you.
Good night, everybody.